How's everyone doing? Glad you could join me. I wanted to talk to you about God leaving you or forsaking you. It's kind of a common passage or a common thing that we hear a lot. God will never leave you nor forsake you. And there's two passages that come to mind. One is in Hebrews 13:5, and the one that I'm going to read is actually in Joshua 1 verse 5. I'm going to read it to you real quick out of the New King James. And it says a little something like this. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. So I decided to look up these two words, leave and forsake. And actually in the Hebrew, instead of leave, it's actually the word fail. So I will never fail you nor forsake you. The word leave or fail is actually the same word as rapha, which is heal, but in this tense it means feeble, weaken, go, alone, idle, stay, slack, faint, be forsaken, cease. That's pretty much it. The word for forsake is azav, which means to relinquish, leave off, fail, fortify, leave destitute, refuseth. So anyways, so you kind of get the point. So I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now I want to tell you a little story about a man named Moses. It's very interesting that God tells Joshua about Moses. He brings up Moses. He says, as I was with Moses, I'm pretty much going to be with you. You know, we forget about the very first thing that we read about Moses, and that is he was actually about to be killed because the Pharaoh issued a command to kill all the firstborn sons. Moses was one of those. Now, we see that he gets tossed into a river, and this is just no ordinary river, right? I mean, this is a raging river. It's not a creek. I want to say it's like the Nile or something. And he gets thrown into this river in a basket, and then somebody finds him. One of Pharaoh's, I think Pharaoh's daughters finds him. And then he grows up. So, okay, so first thing you see, God didn't leave him or forsake him right there on the spot. Very first thing, Moses was spared because, well, for whatever reason. Then he grows up in a palace. He grows up as a king's kid. And we find out that he studied in literature. He was intelligent. He had all these things going for him. He was astounding, like in every way, shape, or form. And he also studied martial arts because that was something that the Egyptians did back then. They learned it from the Eastern culture, but be that as it may, he was a very strong and powerful man, not just in stature, but the fact that as you read on, when God shows up to him finally and says, hey, you're going to set my people free, he goes out and kills an Egyptian soldier with one punch, to my knowledge. I mean, maybe he wrestled him or something, but he kills him with his fists. So that's pretty intense. That, I mean, he understood that concept, how to kill a man, okay, with his bare hands. Then, you know, then the rest of the story, the Jews, some of his Jewish brothers, he tries to break up a fight. The rest, they're like, hey, what are you going to kill us and bury us too and, you know, hide the body or whatever? And Moses takes off running. He leaves, you know. So then we read a little bit more about his life, but it would seem that God had forsaken him or left him or failed him. But again, he didn't. So for 40 years, Moses had to live in a desert, and he had to probably recall daily this mistake that he made all the time. And I'm sure he regretted every single minute of it. I'm sure he thought about it many, many times and relived it, killing this Egyptian guard. And he hated it, because now look at him. He was once royalty. He was top of the world. He had everything he needed. And then he became a sheep herder and hung out in a desert. So then he sees a burning bush, and he shows up on top of a mountain. Then, this is where most people know the story from here. Then God calls him again, and he's like, look, I need you to set my people free. He's freaking out. He's like, look, I can't really talk well. I'm not, you know, why don't you send Aaron or somebody else? Why don't you do something? You know, I don't think I'm really I'm not the man for the job. Is basically what he was saying. And it just, it's amazing. Anyways, this is kind of a little just insight, I guess, dealing with that, and then the whole throwing his rod down and it turns into a snake, and Moses is scared, he's freaking out, right? That would have never happened 40 years ago. Moses would have been like, oh yeah, send me, I'll take care of it, I can handle this, this is no big deal. Not anymore. He's a totally different person now, right? So, anyway, so moving forward, we know Moses didn't get into the promised land. Again, it would seem that God had forsaken him or left him, right? Left him be. But I want to read you this one last thing. Again, I would encourage you to read the whole thing of Moses. There's so much more. I was just touching on a couple things. Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 5 and 6. And this touches me every time I read this. Every single time. It almost brings me to tears. Because, to my knowledge, no one ever had this type of service from God, from the Lord. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he, God, buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite of Beth Peor. But no one knows his grave to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his natural vigor diminished. And that's all I wanted to read. Just by reading those 3 verses, you would see how close God was to Moses. He had a personal burial. To my knowledge, no one else has had that. No one else has had a personal burial by God himself. That's amazing. So my encouragement to you is that when you're feeling like God is abandoning you, when you feel like God's not there, when you feel like everything is crashing around you and God's not with you or to help you, look at this. Moses was spared in the Nile, in the river. He was even spared with the Pharaoh. Even when he killed an Egyptian, he was still spared. God was still with him. Even the 40 years in the desert, God was still with him. And then God still showed up and still brought to remembrance the purpose of his life, the goal for his life. And God still used him in mighty ways. It would appear that God had never forsaken him and never left him, never left his side, never failed him once. So take heart in that. Take heart in knowing that God has got your back. God's with you. He's got your back no matter what you do. No matter what happens, he's going to be there. And he sees everything. He sees it all. He knows what's going on. All right? Love you guys. Be blessed. Have a great day.